Hello again, Sean Scorbo here for another informational update on COVID-19. Sorry about the change in setting. We're in the barn today. It's pretty rainy and windy, so we're not in our usual office area with the dogs and the goats. Today we're going to start focusing on the finer points of the pandemic caused by COVID-19. If you haven't yet, I urge you to watch the previous videos in this series for context and get a little bit more of a global view, whereas today we're going to focus on one item in particular. In those previous videos, you'll notice that I've stopped trusting the information coming from the White House. Republican or Democrat, urban or rural, the information coming out of the White House has the potential to kill. I don't say that lightly. I am saying that as a retired physician. I strongly urge you to take any news conference hosted by the White House and disregard the information you hear there unless you see Dr. Fauci near the podium. Dr. Fauci's allowed to speak, and he's allowed to address any misinformation. Dr. Fauci was not part of yesterday's news conference, and the federal employee, Dr. Briggs, put in his place, immediately attempted to spin the data and the information by saying that no child from Europe has yet died. That is indeed good news, but there are currently children in the U.S. hospitalized for COVID-19, and at least one of them is on a ventilator right now. It's this type of cherry picking of data and information that gets people in trouble, and the public takes that information at face value as a reason to be less vigilant. That leads me to the topic of chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and now azithromycin in combination. Chloroquine was invented in the 1930s to combat malaria, but it wasn't widely distributed because it was very toxic. The urgent nature of World War II and battles in tropical areas with malaria kind of pushed those concerns to the side for a while. However, World War II gave scientists 5 years worth of data to analyze, and it was found that the difference between what's known as a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose was too slim. In other words, you could give just enough to treat the disease, and it was just a tiny step to actually killing the patient. So an alternative was in order. That led us to a medication called hydroxychloroquine, an improvement over straight chloroquine, but still really toxic in its own right. Now let's talk about azithromycin, the other drug that they want to combine this with. It's a long-used antibiotic, but one with a shared side effect to hydroxychloroquine, and that's known as prolonged QT syndrome. Prolonged QT syndrome is a fancy way of saying there's an increased chance of causing a short circuit in the heart's electrical system. It's a short circuit that causes what's known as ventricular fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, and death. Basically, azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine can each cause that short circuit in your heart all on their own. What isn't known is what happens when you combine them at the dosages that it looks like we would need to use for COVID-19, and that's why the FDA wants to study the combination further. That leads me to another time in our history when we took 2 FDA-approved drugs that had toxicity on their own, that was felt to be manageable, and we combined them. That drug was called fenphen. For those that don't recall, there was a heavy lobbying effort in the mid-90s to have the FDA approve fenphen because people were concerned about deaths from obesity. And it sounds familiar. What happened because the drug was rushed through? Well, there ended up being 175,000 claims against the drug manufacturer for deaths, pulmonary hypertension, leaky heart valves. Basically, if you lived, you had a lifelong serious medical condition. Now, what's already occurring within a day of the president's remarks. First, a couple in Arizona was poisoned when they took a fish tank additive because it contained chloroquine, and the president said it would cure them or keep them safe. The man in the couple is dead, the woman's hospitalized. When interviewed, she was quoted as saying, quote, "We saw Trump on TV, every channel, all of his buddies, and that this was safe. Trump kept saying it was basically pretty much a cure," unquote. When asked what message she had for the public, she replied, "Oh my God, don't take anything. Don't believe anything that the president says, or his people. Call his doctor." That's good advice. Second, there's been a run on chloroquine in Nigeria and Africa in general, where you don't need a prescription to obtain the drug. The result? 2 toxicity-related deaths in a day. Third, there's now a shortage of chloroquine azithromycin drug regimen which actually has been approved at a different dosage for lupus patients. So now those guys can't get their medication. It may well be that chloroquine azithromycin drug regimen, if found to be tolerated at the dosages necessary to treat the virus, can help. This may be especially true if zinc is added to the regimen. However, I've read what the president quotes as, quote, very, very encouraging, unquote, evidence, and I'm actually skeptical without a lot more data. There wasn't enough there. We have 2 drugs that are toxic to the heart, and you want to give them to people based on scant evidence. 2 drugs that we know kill on their own. 2 drugs that you now want to combine. 2 drugs that the scientific community is asking for time to study to see if the potential treatment is worse than the disease. 2 drugs that the president, without knowing what the hell he's talking about, is pushing. This is the equivalent of the fenphen issue on a much larger scale with much heavier political pressure, and this time it's being pushed by a man with no science background whose supposed genius is based on some scientifically unexplainable passage from an uncle that taught at MIT to him. Sound weird? It's because it is, because that's not how intelligence or genetics works. I'm shocked that this is a man currently giving medical advice and that people are listening. Please take everything that comes out of the White House with a grain of salt. Thank you.